Hi everyone, welcome to ADEX Pixel Virtual Expo, and today we have none other a session that most of us looking forward to, which is in conversation with David Strike and his guest, of course. Today we have the honor of having Phil Short with us to tell us a little bit more about his exciting journey and exploration, and also all the stories that we all have always wanted to hear. So let me just briefly introduce, of course, none other than David Stride, the moderator for today. I think David is a name that we don't really need to actually tell us, explain any more further. We've seen him every time during Dive exhibition, and also our weekly bi-weekly talks with him as well. Next we have, of course, is Phil Short. Phil is from the UK, and he is the dive industry consultant and also a training director for IANTD UK. Just a little background on Phil himself. He has a massive and comprehensive experience in adventure sports that included dry caving, and he has a very deep fascination with the flooded places within caves, and was amplified when he attended a talk by Martin Farr on cave diving. He also attended an open water diver course run by Steve Axtell, a person who inspired him with the enthusiasm and drive that he has maintained for the past 28 years. Phil Short began diving regularly, first as a dive master and then as an instructor. He later joined a British cave diving group, CDG, where he learned to cave underwater and to pass through flooded sections to open caves beyond. The two parallel diving paths led Phil Short to technical diving under the mentorship of Dave Thompson, Kevin Gurr, and Bill Stone. And later, he was encouraged to pursue his passion and also desire to explore in both open water as well as cave, a drive that led to his involvement in large expedition to the mountains of southern Mexico, and put him on the path to becoming a fellow of the Explorers Club and a fellow of the Royal Geographical Society, FRGS. Herewith, without any further ado, I would like to pass this session to David to continue this conversation, which I think most of us can't wait to hear. David, over to you.
Thank you, Nora. Phil, welcome.
Thank you.
Sort of a world, a world apart at the moment, but just before we get going, a friend of yours I was talking to just a short while ago, Simon Pridmore, who's actually hopefully watching this from quarantine in Hong Kong. So I said that I'd do a quick shout on behalf of Simon, who's stuck in a hotel room overlooking Happy Valley at the moment. Sorry? Can you hear me, Phil?
Yeah, I can hear you. I don't know.
Sorry. It just sort of vanished for a moment there. So, yes, hello from Simon. And talking of Simon, you worked together in the UK.
Simon was owner of IANTD UK for a time. Kevin Gurr first bought it to the UK from the US and owned it with his wife Mandy for many years. And then basically when he moved into big time manufacturing, Simon took it over. And at that time I was pretty much purely teaching IANTD in the UK as my living, all the technical courses. So I got to be very close friends with Simon.
Yeah.
But we'd met previously working together in Guam over a two 3-month seasons over a couple of years. And he owned a dive centre in Guam and lived in Guam at that time. So that's how I met him before he even came to the UK again.
That was a fascinating project there, wasn't it?
Indeed,
looking for a galleon.
Yeah, it's one of the, I think it's 7 missing Manila galleons. The 2 probably most famous of which being the Atosha and the Margarita in the Gulf of Mexico off the end of Key West, out near Marquesas Key. And one of the others is believed to have struck the southern tip of Guam, small island called Cocos Island, dashed on the reef and then sunk. And the team have been searching for it ever since.
Right. And that was once again a good team. That was Kevin Wings Stocks, I think, was there.
Oh, yeah, Wings, and well, originally it was run by Billy Deans,
right?
And Kevin got invited on the team with Billy and Wings, and then basically when Billy stopped running it, Kevin was given the role of running it, and then basically because I was working with him in the UK, invited me to come out on the team, and Wings was one of the team members, who is just a legend. He's one of those larger than life people that you spend 3 months with a guy like that, and he's amazing. And Simon lived on the island at that time. His girls were very young, so he lived there. He owned a dive center on Guam, so we requisitioned him from his dive center and got him on the team as well, and did some great dives, some absolutely great dives.
That would have been a fascinating expedition. Yeah,
it's a stunning.
What prompted you to get into diving? Because your background was very much in caves, wasn't it? As a dry cave.
Well, when I was young, I was always like making tree houses or making boats out of whatever I could find, like pallets, and basically playing in the woods and digging tunnels and all sorts. And I just had a natural affinity for the outdoors and all things outdoorsy, especially the water as a kid. And so when I got a bit older as a teenager, my parents sent me off in the summer holidays on one of these multi-activity adventure holidays. So I went off and tried abseiling and tried archery and tried climbing and tried all these things. And one of the sports on that week's multi-activity trip was caving. And they took us down this cave, which in real terms was probably very short and very small. And I was just captivated I think I was like 15 at the time, absolutely captivated. And so each day you could choose which activity you did. And I think I ended up choosing caving at least once a day for the rest of the whole trip. And then when I got home, I was like, to my mum, I was like, I want to go caving. So she's like, oh, for goodness sake, there was no internet at the time. So she rang the local sports centre and they said, actually, yeah, we've got a caving club that meets here. So she rang them, and I used to go. I couldn't drive, I was too young, but I used to go to the evening meets in the middle of the week, and then I'd sign up for trips, and then one of the designated adults would drive and we'd go caving. And as soon as I was old enough to have my own car and drive, me and a couple of mates would just jump in the car with old clothes and a head mount light on a bungee, not even a helmet, and go off and find cave entrances and just go look. And then slowly I just got more and more fascinated, and then actually started to do it properly and joined a caving club, and slowly started to learn different things to go further through the caves. Like you arrive at a drop, you learn how to use rope to rappel down it. You arrive at a wall, you learn how to use ladders and maypoles and drills to get up that wall to continue. And of course, inevitably, you reach water. So then you wade, then you swim, then you take inflatable boats to follow the rivers underground. And eventually the water hits the ceiling and it's the realm of the cave diver. And I was like, can't go any further. But by chance, one of my early Saturday jobs to make extra pocket money, I worked in a local climbing shop in the town I lived in, and they had a poster on the wall saying, talk at Guildford University this week from cave diver Martin Farr. So right, I can go to that. So went off to the talk. Martin gave this absolutely inspirational and hilarious and wonderful talk, and I bought a copy of his book, which was at that time the first edition of The Darkness Beckons. Went home, devoured it, and was like, that is what I want to do. I want to be a cave diver. I want to be able to explore. I want to go find a piece of the planet nobody's ever seen before, and cave diving seems to be the way that a sensible budget can actually achieve that. And the rest is history, as they say.
God, that was a good, a good person to be inspired by as well.
Absolutely. I mean, he's just a legend. You know, he's just gone on. You go back to his a piece of the planet nobody's ever seen before, and cave diving seems to be the way that a sensible budget can actually achieve that. And the rest is history, as they say.
God.
Just
that was a good, a good person to be inspired by as well.
Absolutely. I mean, he's just a legend. You know, he's just gone on. You go back to his a piece of the planet nobody's ever seen before, and cave diving seems to be the way that a sensible budget can actually achieve that.
What's happening?
And the rest is history, as they say. We seem to be getting the previous played back to us.
Yeah. Nora, a good person.
Seems to. Can you hear me still?
I can hear you now, Phil. Are we back? Sort of.
Yeah, it seems to have stopped now. Seems back to normal. It was just seemed to be playing back what we'd already said, but we're back again.
Oh, that was very weird. That's quite thrown me now. Hey, so that was really, I guess, your encouragement into, for want of a better term, technical diving. You started in and helped form that first sort of tech diving team.
Yeah, in the UK, I mean, once I'd decided that's what I wanted to do, the British Cave Diving Group, CDG, said, well, okay, you're doing lots of caving, that's good, that's what we want, but what you need to do next is just go off and learn to dive, then come back to us to learn to cave dive. So I went off to learn to dive. At that time, there was no real internet, so I got a dive magazine from the newsagents, went in the back to the classifieds, found a dive school relatively close to me, went down there on the train and got off the train, got picked up by the dive school and did a PADI open water course. And it just so happened, again, right place at the right time. The instructor that did that was a guy called Steve Axtell. So anyone listening who was in the early years of PADI in the UK, he's a bit of a legend. He was just the most inspirational, gifted educator, teacher, just oozed passion about all things diving. So as well as getting that open water qualification that the CDG wanted me to have, I just fell in love with diving as well as a side sport. So went through like advanced open and rescue and eventually dive master and ended up working for Steve's company a couple of years later as an instructor, which got me on the diving path. And then from that, I moved slightly sideways into technical diving when it first came to the UK, did my technical nitrox and my trimix with Kevin Gurr, did my rebreather with Dave Thompson, and then started to work with them. And we set up a team called DEEP, Dorset Extreme Exploration Projects, which was a bunch of old deep air wreck divers that had kind of seen the light and started using better gases. And we went out, we were very lucky. We used to go out more or less every weekend, dive an unknown anomaly on the seabed that the fishermen or the side scans have picked up. And we were regularly finding brand new wrecks. And it was kind of the birth time of tech diving in the UK. So it was a great time to be involved.
You did a lot of filming on wrecks. There was the Jutland thing, far more sort of recently.
Yeah, we got first filming job we did out of that team with Kev Gurr was on an experimental submarine called the M1. M classes of submarine. There were 3 of them. One was a mine layer. One had an aircraft hangar on deck and a catapult. So it would surface. The submarine would surface. A door would open, and they'd wheel out this little biplane, unfold the wings, and catapult it into the air as a spotter. And then it would land in the sea. Small crane would lift it on board, fold the wings and put it back in its hangar, and then the submarine could go down. And that one's a famous normal depth range dive off of Portland in the UK that, you know, advanced recreational or technical divers do almost every weekend in the summer. The mine layer was scrapped, but the M1 was quite a unique thing. It had an enormous artillery cannon on the front, so she could surface, elevate this cannon. Obviously, she could only fire straight line because with the recoil of a gun like that, she'd have just tipped over. But she could like pop up, fire a shell 20, 30 miles inland, sink and disappear. But she got hit by one of her own ships in a training exercise, which knocked the gun off, tipped her over, and she sunk tragically with all hands. And Keith Morris was part of the first team that found her And then BBC approached Kev as a commercial company to go out and film her for a documentary as part of a series. And so we got to go out and dive and film her. Funnily enough, back to the strangeness of how people meet, like me and Kevin and Simon Pridmore, and on this job, the two of the bottom divers, along with Kevin and myself, were Richard and Ingmar Lundgren, who are now part of the real hierarchy of GUE, and of course, very famously found the Mars. So when you look back in history and you go, all these people that are doing these really cool things now, and you sort of trace back down, you know, they all kind of started off at the same point and all knew each other and dived together. And so that was pretty cool. Yeah. And then from that, out of that job, we then, as you correctly said, we got invited by Channel 4 to go out and film the Battle of Jutland wrecks, certain wrecks from the Battle of Jutland. And this was not as a diving documentary, it was a history documentary led by Innes McCartney, who's published vast amounts of incredible literature on Jutland and submarines and all of this stuff. So he was on the ship with us as a diver. It was Kevin and myself as bottom divers, big support crew. And we dived a variety of wrecks to try and prove why the British ships sunk so quickly and why the Germans didn't. That was the aim of the research and the documentary. So,
and the conclusions?
So we had an incredibly rapid rate of fire. So within 60 seconds, our gunners could get off an enormous amount of shells. And the reason they achieved that, they took a bit of a safety dodge. In a barbette, in a gun turret, there's basically doors to a room that stores the shells, a room that stores the cartridges, and a room that stores the silk bags of cordite to propel the shell. And what they would do is they'd pretty much leave all those doors open, so a chain of men could pass new weaponry into the barbette, load a new one and fire, load a new one and fire. The downside of that was if the enemy got a direct hit on a gun turret, the spark would then flash through the open door to the store of cordite and munitions, and then effectively blow that whole gun turret to pieces. And that, like Queen Mary, for example, she went down unbelievably quickly, like almost instantaneously, because one of the turrets just hit and sparked through to the magazine. The German ships had a slower rate of fire, but they had that typical discipline of open one door, remove the required item, open the next door, remove the required item, open the third door, remove the required item. After each time closing the door, build the next shell, load it into the gun, fire it, and repeat, which slowed them down, but it meant if we got a direct hit, we might take out a turret, but not the whole ship.
Yeah. You've been very sort of varied between these wonderful expeditions to ships and wrecks and caves, of course, and involved in the archaeology as well of that the one in Greece particularly. I'm still absolutely fascinated by that, in the main because of the technology you use.
Yeah, we did. We got to bring all the toys out on that one. I mean, this was a wreck called the Antikythera shipwreck. Antikythera is the name of the island that she's on, and Antikythera, big island just to the south of the southern tip of mainland Greece, the Peloponnese, called Kythera. And then Antikythera is a tiny island underneath it, which, depending on how you interpret it, either means Little Kythera or Under Kythera, but it's basically just a small island off the end of Kythera. And this, what's believed to be a very large, probably up to 70-meter Roman ship, a grain carrier, was carrying beautiful artifacts from around the empire back towards Rome and sunk. And it was found in 1901 by Greek sponge divers in standard dress, brass helmet, hand-pumped air down the umbilical, who were sheltering from a storm in an unknown spot. And they said, well, while we're here, we might as well see if there's any sponges. And the first diver put down was a beginner, because it wasn't a known sponge spot. So the chief diver was like, well, I'm not wasting my time, you go. And he went down and immediately pulled the alarm, and they pulled him back up, and he was white and ashen and shell shook and said, there's bodies all over the seabed. There's bodies all over the seabed. So the chief diver was like, no, you must be narked. I'll go down. So he went down to between 50 and 60 meters. So pretty deep on standard dress with air. So a little bit of narcosis. And the guy was right. The seabed was covered in bodies, but of marble and bronze. So if you go to the National Museum of Archaeology in Athens, most of the finest example of bronze lost wax sculptures in the museum came from this one shipwreck. But amongst all those sculptures was this strange little concreted block within which were the teeth of cogs sticking out that basically has become known as the Antikythera mechanism, effectively the world's first computer, so to speak. And they believe, or they hypothesize, what it was for was predicting the motion of some celestial body, planets, a comet, something like this.
And how old's the wreck, Phil?
The wreck is about 200 BC, so it's very old. And then, so basically after these sculptures have been removed, it got left in 76, I think it was, 75, 76. Cousteau went back. So if the listeners have got the Cousteau box set, there's an episode in there called In Search of Roman Plunder. It's actually on the same DVD as the Britannic that Cousteau did. And that shows them diving the Antikythera wreck with airlifts, digging down into the seabed, bringing out more artifacts. Right. And then it was left again. And then the Greek Ephora of Antiquities approached Woods Hole Oceanographic Institute in the US for assistance. And Brendan Foley was basically sent with a team to help them continue excavation of the site. And we ended up doing 7 years there. Some years we did 2 seasons, a spring season.
How did you get involved with Woods Hole?
Very right place at the right time again. I often say to people who go, how do you get to do the things you do in diving? Patience, perseverance, and being in the right place at the right time. So again, Woods Hole decided they needed closed circuit rebreather technology for scientific diving applications. They looked around the industry. They talked to other institutions like the US National Park Service and people that were already using rebreather and said, what should we buy? What should we use? And they basically decided that what they needed was a rebreather that had a lot more autonomous instrumentation to make it more able to warn a diver of systems problems. So at that time, they went with Kevin Gurr's rebreather, the Sentinel, which was the second rebreather he built after the Ouroboros production rebreather. So they brokered the deal to buy a large number of these units for Woods Hole Oceanographic Institute with VR Technologies, Kev's company. And of course, then the question came, well, who trains us? And Kev said, well, we would highly recommend that we send you our test diver and our chief trainer, but we can't make you do that. So here's a list of all our other instructors around the world. And they said, no, we'll get your guy. So I went out to Crete, to Heraklion, to train Woods Hole's dive safety officer, Ed O'Brien, Brendan Foley from Woods Hole, and some guys from the Greek Ephora of Antiquities in just how to use the equipment. And over a 7-day rebreather course, we got to like each other. And Brendan basically said, we'd really like you to come back on the project and effectively be there as our supervisor, guardian, assistant, rebreather fixer, and constant trainer, because we're scientists. We don't dive all the time. We need more than just a week's course. So I went on the first job with that invite. And again, like they say, the rest is history. I did 7 years in Antikythera, 2 seasons on the Mentor wreck, then moved on to work on Second World War aircraft wrecks with that same team, and now working in the Baltic on a 1495 Danish King ship and more Second World War aircraft wrecks. So right place, right time. I was working for the manufacturer they chose to buy rebreathers from as a trainer when they needed a trainer, and I was sent, and it opened the door.
Quite apart from the rebreathers, you were also using at one stage there the exosuit, weren't you? Mm-hmm. So stepping back a bit, how did you get to use the exosuit? Presumably you did commercial diver training or commercial training?
Well, what basically happened was the exosuit was made by Phil Nutyan at Nutco, obviously. Yeah. And it's the sort of the next iteration, the modernization, improvement, the upgrade, if you like, of the Nut suit. And so basically a New York commercial diving company had bought 2 of these suits from Nuco, and they were heavily related to Woods Hole. They'd worked together, they'd advised each other. And what they used the exosuit for in New York was there was a valve failure in a deep well, 2 parallel deep wells that fed New York City with its water supply, and pretty much too deep to dive standard commercial diving. And although it could have been done, but the big problem was the access point to the well was too small to get a saturation system into, so they couldn't have put the divers in. So they said, well, we could do it with a 1 atmosphere suit, because we can wheel that in through the tunnel, lower it into the water, the guys can go down and work. And they said, okay, but you can only work from like 9 p.m. till 4 a.m. because that's when we're not using the water. And so they budgeted buying the exosuits, doing the whole project, and they did it successfully. And so then this commercial company owned the suits, and they, through a variety of negotiations, offered to loan it and train a team from our archaeological group to use the suit. So the suit was shipped to Woods Hole Oceanographic Institute up in Woods Hole in Boston. 6 of us were shipped out to Woods Hole, including Ed O'Brien, the Woods Hole dive safety officer, to actually do not just a try dive, but do our full pilot's training on the exosuit, which was just like, talk about kid in a sweet shop. I was like, would you like to do this? Hold on a minute, twist my arm 1 more second. So flew off to Boston, went up to Woods Hole, and we did all the theory, the mechanics, the strip down, the build, the systems checks, all of this. And it came to and I was taking notes, taking photos, asking questions. So I was like the team nerd. And it got to the first day where the unit was rigged for a dive. And so the instructor said, so who's first? You're all going to get to go in it for the necessary number of dives to qualify, but who's first? And the whole team just pointed at me and said, for goodness sake, put him in first, because maybe then he'll shut up for half an hour. And I'll never forget my first dive, because the Woods Hole dock, where all sorts of famous expeditions had launched from, like the Finding of the Titanic by Ballard. Right. They launched from there on the Woods Hole ship, etc. Alvin, the mini sub that found Titanic, is based there. So it's a really historic place. And there's a moon pool in the middle of the dock. And the crane picked me up in the suit and lowered me down into the moon pool. And it went into the water. And as the water came up over the mast, I was like, wow, this is amazing. And then they disconnect the crane, and then you're in control. And I started to descend. And I got down to about 15 meters depth. And it's 20 meters deep under the dock of Woods Hole. And a cormorant bird just literally flew past the viewport. So I was like, on the comms, I was like, firstly, I'm diving a 1 atmosphere suit in the ocean, not in a training tank. And secondly, a bird just flew past my viewport. So excited. It was absolutely amazing.
The whole thing with the 1 atmosphere suits are just superb. But Phil Newton particularly, he developed that system of the joints, wasn't it?
Yeah. That's the secret to Phil's stuff, is the joints, because when you put the suit on land, you think, how are you ever going to move the arms? How am I ever going to move the legs? And as soon as you drop in the water, and literally like it can be 1 meter under, the system just kicks into his design, and you can move your arms really freely on all those joints. He's been working his whole life towards a jointed hand, a human hand design. Still not there yet. So all we have on the Exo and a Newt is a pincer.
Right.
But a big part of the training is learning to do things with a pincer. So what we were doing in Woods Hole was learning to lower a net over a 1-ton concrete block, use an air nozzle to blow a hole under the block, so we could then pull the drawstring and get the net to tighten under the block, then connect a crane hook to the drawstring of the net and have the crane lift and flick the block over so it could be lifted. And the reason for that is, on the Antikythera wreck in the museum, there are 3 marble horses, almost life-size, and a huge over life-size marble Hercules. And the thought was that these 4 horses were pulling a chariot with the Hercules in it as a big sculpture, and the chariot would have been wooden and with ornateness. And they found the Hercules, and they found 3 of the horses, but 1 is missing. And if you look back through the history of the sponge divers and the Greek effort with the steamship recovering what was recovered, it was probably recovered and then dropped, thinking it was just a rock that may have been on top of other stuff. So on one of our expeditions, we had a really high-grade ocean scanning system on board from a company called EdgeTech, and they found these anomalies off the Antikythera wreck site, too deep for CCR dive, certainly a working CCR dive. And so the idea was, let's use the exosuit to go and try and recover these in case one of them is a missing horse. So that was the plan.
And you've got long, or it's lengthy life support systems, don't they? That suit.
Yeah, you basically, the whole suit is a rebreather. So behind your back is an enormous kidney-shaped soft-lime canister, and then an electric fan, and it circulates the gas through the canister and around the whole suit. So you basically are in a one-man suit-shaped submarine. And then on top of that, on your belly is another mini rebreather that's got a loop and a mouthpiece and a nose peg. So if there's ever a problem with the internal fan or soft-lime or something like that, you could revert to a normal rebreather inside, because you can take your arms out of the arms. So when you're in the suit, you pull your arms out of the arms, and then you can reach the control panel here, control panel here. You can reach that backup rebreather. If it's a long dive, you can get your lunch or a sippy bottle of water. And most importantly, it does have an umbilical. Someone was asking on the pre-talk Facebook yesterday, is it autonomous? It's got an umbilical, but all the umbilical does is gives crystal clear wired communications. Right. And also it sends high electrical power down for the thrusters, because the suit's got basically 4 DPVs on it, 2 vertical and 2 horizontal. Yeah. So you can move around against pretty big currents in all axis of movement. And if the umbilical gets snagged or some problem, there's a lever in the helmet that would cut away the umbilical. Once you've cut away the umbilical, you then lose the wired communications that you have through water communications on a UQC, and you use the power to the thrusters. So the next thing you do is there's levers to your side that drop the thrusters, which make you positive and you float up. Of course, no problem with floating up because you're at 1 atmosphere, so there's no decompression issue. Yeah. So breathing wise, the suit is self-contained. No gas comes down the umbilical. It's just power for the thrusters and comms.
And how long do you spend in it, Phil?
It's got, with both rebreathers, and I'll scratch my memory here because it was a few years back we did the course, but I know it's in excess of 48 hours of life support. So if it was stuck on the bottom with the umbilical failed, it's in excess of 48 hours life support as is, with those rebreathers, but you don't stay down that long. I mean, basically, you stay down effectively to get the job done, and obviously things like staying focused and getting fatigued and what have you. But the beauty is, you can basically stay down 4 hours, come up immediately, get out of it, put the next diver in it, submerge, because there's no decompression. Yeah. So you could rotate the 6-man team. You've got 6 trained divers on the suit. The most work you need to do is you can change the segments of the legs or the arms to suit the height of the diver. Yeah. If you've got a really tall guy, you'd have the longest legs. You've got a really short guy, you'd have the shortest legs, and you can swap that around.
That would have been a fascinating project to be on, that one. Other projects that you've undertaken, there was the body recovery, or the that was for the US parks, you said?
No, that was in 2017. The team from Antikythera was a really well-established team, included Brett Seymour and Dave Condon from the US National Park Service, Evan Kovacs from Woods Hole, image capturer, photogrammetry expert, videographer, Gemma Smith, myself, Brendan Foley, and a Greek contingent from the Ministry of Antiquities. And that team was working pretty well together. So we got the opportunity, believe it or not, although the Antikythera shipwreck was from 200 BC, we found intact human remains on it, compressed in the sand. So over 2,000 years, they've been preserved. So when you find like a human skull from 200 BC in a warm marine environment, that's kind of almost unheard of, and it gets all the scientists going crazy. So to sort of jump sideways from that pedigree of being our scientists being properly trained archaeologists, they knew how to forensically care for and be careful of and look after remains. They weren't like a team of commercial divers. So there's an organization in the US called the DPAA, Defense POW MIA Accounting Agency. And their remit, whether it be on land, in a jungle, up a mountain, in the snow, or underwater, is to visit all known sites where American veterans and heroes, servicemen would have been lost but didn't get returned, and search the site to a conclusion of either returning them home for interment at Arlington and family ceremonies, etc., or concluding that they're no longer at the site, there's no physical remains at the site, and closing that site down. So we got the invitation to go and do this job on a 40-meter deep B-24 bomber called the Tulsa American off of the island of Vis in Croatia. So our Antikythera team shipped out to Croatia. The Croatian military said they would provide us a boat. We were a bit shocked when they provided us with a tank landing craft. So we had a landing ship tank, LST. Get my letters muddled up there because so many different types. A landing ship tank, LST, that could take about 6 tanks. And this was on a 3-point mooring over the wreck. And we had on board our blending station, our ROV pilot station. Each diver had his own bench for his rebreather and rebreather support. And basically we worked off that ship for a month. And on that job, what we were doing was using a water dredge to suck up the sediment from around the nose of the aircraft and down from the seabed to bedrock, which is a fairly low strata, about 10, 20 centimeters. And we would recover those bags of sediment to surface and then sift them every day, looking for any possible remains within that sediment. And we did that for a month. And as I said, this was 2017 and the B-24 Tulsa American. As a result of that, after the laboratory work and the analysis was done, they were able to confirm that we had located Eugene Ford, and he was basically then sent back to America, received a full military honors ceremony at Arlington. His family received his remains back and were able to bury him and have closure after all these years. So incredibly rewarding work, very challenging work. So we got sent to do that job, and Kirk Wolfinger came with his team to do a documentary of it for Nova channel, which was, I think it was titled The Last B-24. And they did a really good, really sensitive job of it. You know, a lot of time when you work with TV companies and then you watch the program, you're like, we never said that. That's not what we were trying to say. But Kirk did an amazing job. The documentary of that is very emotional because of the nature of what it is. You're sending a young boy who sacrificed all for his country and for many countries, and you're finally giving him the rest he deserved. So that was an incredible job.
Yeah, and that, as we mentioned earlier, Steve Lewis said it brought him to tears hearing you do that talk on that.
Yeah, I do. The last slide of that talk, because most of the talk is on the technology we used to commercially dive it and achieve what we needed to achieve. But the last slide is a picture of Eugene Ford and then Binion's poem at the going down of the sun. We were with them at the bottom, and I always speak that at the end, and I always get a croaky voice and nearly cry when I'm ending my own talk. And that was the moment that hit home for Steve. So because Steve and I have been on expedition together twice as well.
Yeah, you were the Bell Island mine.
That's right. Yeah. We did the first one.
Yes. Now the story. Now, Steve did indicate that you had a little run-in with the Royal Canadian Police.
Yeah, the RCMP. Well, one of our team members, a wonderful guy called Mark, he was an active member of the Royal Canadian Mounted Police at the time. but was regularly fun diving through Rick Stanley's dive centre in Newfoundland, Ocean Quest. And so Rick and Debbie Stanley, who are just legends of the dive industry, they're two of the nicest people I ever meet. They're like, anyone who goes there becomes family member. They were the host and the base for this expedition. Steve pretty much put it together, and a team arrived to go and explore this mine. And at the end of the project, for a variety of reasons, we succeeded on the project. We had a couple of sort of down moments for various reasons, but at the end, we all needed to let off some steam. So we went off downtown to a bit of a ceremony and to have a few beers. And it was my first trip to Newfoundland, so I got made an honorary Newfie by being screeched in, which involves kissing a cod, eating some revolting, stinky part of a fish, and drinking local screech rum and being sworn in as a local Newfie. And once you've done it, you're a Newfie for life. So we did that, and then the drinking continued, and I was really kind of 7 sheets to the wind, so to speak. And at one point I was so tired. We were in this very luxury hotel for this reception of what we'd done. And I laid on the floor in the entrance reception of the hotel. Bear in mind, outside it's like -10 midwinter and snow. So there's this big mat for people to bash out their snow on. I laid on the floor, grabbed the corner of the mat, rolled across the floor and wrapped myself in the mat to have a little sleep. And the security got me out of that. And then I left, and I was walking down the main high street of St. John's in a pair of combat pants, a pair of Converse shoes, which are not waterproof or snowproof, and a t-shirt and a woolly hat, really drunk. And I had an open bottle of screech rum in one cargo pocket and a closed one in the other pocket. And I kept pulling the bottle out and drinking. And apparently in Newfoundland, Canada, it's against the law to drink alcohol out in the open in public. So the RCMP car pulled up behind me, the lights flashed, the siren blared, and the guys get out, and they're all big lads, and they come up and go, "What are you doing? You're not supposed to be drinking in public. Look at the state of you." And of course I said, "Oh, I'm terribly sorry. I didn't know I wasn't allowed to," in my lovely English accent. And they said, "Where are you from?" I said, "I'm from England." I said, "What are you doing here?" I said, "I'm on that project, Dive in the Mine." And for a variety of reasons, it was fairly well known in the community by this point. So he said, "Ah, you're with Rick Stanley. Come on, get in the car. We'll take you back to the party." So I get in the car, drinking my rum. They drive me back to the party, and they deliver me to the party. And Rick's there along with Mark, the RCMP guy on our team. And they go, "Is this yours?" Like, "Yeah, that's fine. We'll keep him under better control." And off they go. So I could have spent the night in the cells, but ended up getting delivered back to Ocean Quest. So.
It impressed Steve, the fact you talked your way out of it.
And then we got to go back then. I think it was like, I don't know, 4 years later, we went back to do the second part of that expedition with Jill at this time.
Yeah.
So, yeah, pretty cool.
And then the other major, I guess, cave expedition was with Bill Stone in Mexico.
Yeah, J2. I mean, the way I like to describe J2 is I was just over 45 years old when I did it. Honestly, I could have probably done with being a bit younger for the physical aspects of it, but I needed to be 45 to have acquired all the skills and knowledge and ability that I had to be ready for the project. And it was the first really massive cave project where everything I'd learned since where we begun this story, being a dry caver before I was old enough to drive. So the dry caving skills, the rope skills, the climbing skills, the rebreather skills, the diving skills, the cave diving skills, everything. And lots of expedition experience of living in remote places on bad food in sort of less than sanitary conditions, all just melded together. And I was actually in Slovenia at a conference giving a talk on cave exploration, and Bill was there giving a talk on his plans to send a rogue AUV to Europa's moon to look for life. And he saw my talk and he stopped me after and says, "Can we go for a coffee? I want to chat to you about something." And I said, "Sure." And I knew Bill anyway from meeting him through Kevin Gurr and being mentored by him to a degree at conferences with rebreathers. And he said, he said, I never realized that you were a dry caver and had caving rope skill before. I thought you were just a diver. He said, would you like to come on my project? I said, well, what is it? He said, well, we're going to southern Mexico next January for a minimum of 3 months to try and get through the unpassed fourth flooded section, fourth sump in the J2 cave, and try and continue the descent down to the valley to connect up the master system. And we need divers. So I said, of course, absolutely love to. So I spent about a year training the European contingent of the divers in use of the modified rebreathers we had supplied by Bill for the project, shipped out to New York, and then from New York went down to Mexico City and then on to J2 itself. And by the end of the project, I'd spent 3 months living in the jungle up on the mountaintop in a tent. And of that 3 months, I spent 45 days living underground. The first trip was 19 days, came out for a bit of a rest and some real food and what have you. Then went back in for 5 days to resupply all the camps ready for the big push. And then went back in for 21 days for the last trip. And during that first 19-day trip, Marcin Gala from Poland and myself managed to get through the second flooded section, Sump 2, to Camp 4. And then there was just me and him trapped from the rest of the team in the world by the flooded section for 9 days. During that 9 days, we managed to lay nearly 600 meters of line and pass Sump 4 and surface in the cave diver's dream, virgin, unexplored passageway that no human being has seen, no light has seen, no camera can see, no satellite or drone can get there. It's real exploration like it was in the Victorian era for Shackleton, Amundsen, Scott, etc. And then we continued on to map that section, to descend the waterfall that we found, to try and continue exploration of the cave on for the quest. And then so basically during that 45 days underground, we basically were able to visit parts of the earth no one ever seen before, and built up a camaraderie with Marcin that was beyond friendship. He's like a family member, like a brother now. We spent 9 days alone beyond the sump. The end of the cave where we left it is over 12 kilometers horizontally from the entrance and over 1.2 kilometers vertically from the entrance on rope. So you go to 4 separate campsites between entering and getting to where you go. So it really put perspective on having to go a long way for a dive. It was a 55-man team from 15 different countries over the 3 months to allow 2 people to get through 600 meters of flooded cave to explore the unknown beyond. So it was really a life-changing moment. It was the culmination of everything I'd done over a 30-year career. And it was just amazing, absolutely amazing.
I know it was here a little bit of self-promotion here for Simon and myself, but it was your memorable dive that you included in the Dining with Divers cookbook.
Yeah. That's right. Yeah.
But anyone that wants to read about Phil's wonderful exploits in the cave, do rush out and buy Dining with Divers, the cookbook.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so that would have been a wonderful thing to do, though. Not so much the living underground for so long, though. How did you cope with that for 21 days?
Well enough, everyone who asks about this, like, how do you cope with living underground? And the truth is, the cave entrance is so remote that base camp is up on top of the mountain in cloud forest, secondary jungle. Right. And it's miserable. It either rains or you're in the clouds that the rain comes from, or in thick mist. So it's damp, although it's not cold as in like Arctic, it's damp and chilly. There's every type of jungle insect you can imagine. So it's pretty miserable base camp. So initially you think, on the first trip underground, I look forward to get back out for a bit of fresh air and a bit of daylight. But the camp is in the jungle, so there's no real daylight. You're just in a green gloom. The only way to get sunlight was to climb up the biggest tree in camp, where we'd put a hanging platform in the top of the tree like they use for big wall climbing. So right. You could rope up the tree to get some sunshine in your times out. But because it was a cave exploration project, the underground camps had better equipment, no moisture, no draft, better food, no insects, no bugs, no centipedes, no stuff like this. So it was actually more comfortable underground. But physically, it was incredibly taxing. I mean, I trained hard for the project, so I was probably my leanest, fittest, strongest self when I went, at about 75 kilos of basically muscle. But when I came back home 3 months later, I dropped to 65 kilos, and I'm quite a lean build. 65 kilos is too light. It took me about a year to gradually build myself back up to my original status after the project. So it was tough, but incredibly rewarding.
He's a very talented person, Bill Stone. Of course, you mentioned briefly the AUV. Just for the benefit of people that might not know, that's automated, isn't it?
Autonomous, or AUV is an autonomous underwater vehicle.
Yeah.
Which basically the Woods Hole use a variant of this called the Remus system for very deep water exploration on Earth. What Bill's making is basically an AUV designed to work under an ice cap on Europa, which is one of Jupiter's moons, in the idea that if there's any life anywhere in the solar system, in a sea under a frozen ice cap, there could be bacterial or other type of life to be found. So this thing goes in a spaceship, lands on the ice cap, melts its way through the ice cap, which is up to 1 kilometer thick, trailing a fiber optic behind itself, disconnects when it gets through the ice cap into the alien ocean, and then can swim around that ocean for 30 years, sending its data back to the transponder at the bottom of the fiber optic, which goes up to a transponder on the top of the ice cap and to the satellite and back to us. So he's been working on that for years through his first 3D mapping system that he built for the Wakola 2 project that Jill Heinrich flew, and then to his autonomous system that mapped Sheikh Exley's main dive site that he sadly passed in to conclusion, and then to his latest iteration, which is Sunfish, which was tested in Peacock in Florida in the springs, and then used very successfully in South Africa in the deep caves there, 2019. So all of this and the J2 and the Chevra and all these projects he's done are working towards testing grounds for things he wants to send up into space, including, if he got his way, a one-way ticket team to basically terraform on the moon and extract ice to create hydrogen and oxygen, because his belief is the most expensive part of space exploration is punching out of the Earth's atmosphere because of payload. So if you could launch from the moon where there's no gravity or very little gravity, you'd massively reduce the cost. If the listeners haven't heard it, Google and listen to his TED talk. It's just inspirational stuff. He's an amazing person.
Right. And you mentioned Jill there earlier. You've done, of course, expeditions with Jill. We spoke about that. The desert one earlier with.
Yeah. God, that was another one. I mean, it's I've been very, very lucky. Right place, right time. But I've been to some incredible places with incredible people. With Jill to the mines in Newfoundland, and then also to the Sahara. We basically went with National Geographic, flew into Cairo, picked up some 4x4s, drove along the coast road, past the Alamein, to very close to the border with Libya. At Marsa Matruh, and then down the desert highway 500 kilometers into the desert, which takes you south of the Alamein minefields, which are still there, and you come to a small town called Siwa that is archaeologically famous because Alexander the Great visited it to consult the oracle, a spring, for advice on what to do next in his campaign. And then below Siwa is the Kara Depression, which is a very, very low-lying desert valley, and there are huge shallow freshwater lakes, because freshwater wells up from up to 1 kilometer deep under the desert at huge temperatures. They're thermal springs, out and floods out into these big shallow lakes, which then evaporate, leaving salt pans behind. And the logic was, well, if there's a big freshwater aquifer under the desert, can we find a way into it? Can we find a reliable way to pump and pipe it to work scientifically towards assisting the locals of acquiring fresh water, which is absent, and as a byproduct, find some unexplored cave systems to dive in. And so we went out and spent, I think it was about 3 weeks, working our way down the coastline to Alexandria, and then down to Alamein, and down to Marsa Matruh, and down into the desert, and then off-road through the desert with locals, with Bedu people, to basically find all these known sites, dive in them if we could, most of which involved in the end snorkeling because they were shallow. And as you went deeper in them, you could see the bubbling floor where the hot water comes up out of the ground through fissures, bubbling through the sand and the gravel. And the closer you get, the hotter it gets. But one of my fondest memories was camping in the desert, and the locals saying, well, do you want to go for a hot bath? And we're like, really? He said, yeah. One of the springs is nearby. So we go to this spring. He says, if you get in here, it's warm, and then you move closer and closer to the other end, it will get hotter and hotter, but just stop when you're comfortable. And so much like you get in Japan, these hot thermal springs, or like the Romans used to have even in the UK at Bath Spring, you just get in and it's lovely, like a normal bath, and you move closer and closer, and then it's red hot and you sit dead still. But remember, you're at this point 1,000 kilometers south of the Mediterranean edge of North Africa in the Sahara, and there is no light pollution. You are in a dark sky region to dream of. So you're sat in this natural, free of charge, hot thermal spa, of course, sipping a beer, looking up at the celestial display of stars like nothing I've seen anywhere else ever on the planet, including, being out in the Pacific, where again, there's no light pollution. Just absolutely memorable and mind-blowing. And to share moments like that, these expeditions, the real magic of them is the camaraderie. It's the people you do it with, the emotions and the events you go through with those people, most of which stay private, but that's what stays with you, not just another dive in the logbook or a cool picture to stick up on social media. It's the camaraderie of the guys next to you through the good, the bad, and the awful on these projects that's driven me and kept me young at heart for 30 years. And I've just come back from a major project, and I'm sat here now planning the next one. I'm 52. I've got no intention of slowing down. The lifestyle of this drives me, and it's absolutely wonderful.
I should add, by the way, Phil was 52 when? Just a couple of days ago.
Yeah. What are we on now? The 5th. Yeah, 3 days ago, wasn't it? Yeah, I was 52. I wish they'd stop.
And of course, the 5th of November. You're in the UK. What a perfect place to be for the 5th of November.
Well, there is a bit of a joke, because 5th of November commemorates when a guy called Guy Fawkes tried to blow up Parliament basically in frustration of the inadequacy of the government. And when you look at COVID and Brexit and all that's going on in the world, there's a famous T-shirt going around of, where's Guy Fawkes now? We really need him.
Yes. Because you're in lockdown now, aren't you? Of course.
Yeah, we are. Well, I came back from 2 months working in Croatia. I arrived back here last Friday, the 30th of October, and then I had to go immediately into a 14-day quarantine because I'd been in a country that was not on the travel corridor. So I was like, okay, that's cool. I've been working for 2 months, so I'm looking forward to 14 days at home, just relaxing. And then, of course, as soon as I arrived, they said, oh, by the way, we're going into lockdown. So even though I come out of quarantine next Friday, we're still in lockdown. But the job I've just come back from was planned to be my last major thing of the year. So if the COVID situation doesn't allow me to do anything else the rest of this year, I'm quite comfortable.
And what other projects have you got planned, Phil?
We started work on a Danish king's ship from 1495 called the Gribshunden, the Griffin Hound. Last year in 2019 summer, we did a month-long project on it of archaeological excavation, and the finds we got were incredible. The scientific research behind those finds has been ongoing since. It's basically run by Lund University in Sweden, and we're back out there to continue with that project next year. So that's our first confirmed and major project for 2021.
And whereabouts is that? In the Baltic?
Yeah, it's in the Baltic, off the southern coast of Sweden,
Right.
off a tiny little island called Stora Ekon, which is in the Ronneby archipelago. This was part of Denmark back in 1495. It's now part of Sweden. So it was the Danish king's ship hiding from a storm behind a small island in a little anchorage, and she basically caught fire and sunk. Because it was the king's ship, she's a kind of Danish equivalent of the Mary Rose, really, really important from a variety of reasons. Firstly, she was the king's ship. Secondly, she's right at the turn point where ship architecture started to change. So she's a real time capsule of knowledge about shipbuilding.
And of course, the beauty of the Baltic is the colder sort of waters there.
Yeah, she's buried in cold anoxic low saline mud. So some of the artifacts we've been recovering are just mind-blowingly intact. You know, the one that really struck me was we found, if you think of old indigenous people skills, where people would weave baskets for carrying food from reeds. And you think this is a very delicate thing. You put it in water, it's going to rot and disappear. Well, we found a completely intact hand-woven basket amongst the mud, and we're able to recover it to go to the conservation labs for conservation and display in what will become the Grubsjunden Museum. So it's fascinating stuff.
And there's been some tremendous finds there. There was Richard Lundgren's the Mars project, of course.
Yeah, the whole, I mean, the Baltic Sea, when you look at the work that Thomas Stakura, the owner of Santi, and his team have done in the Baltic, and the things they've found, you know, you look at the work that people from all around the Baltic surround countries have basically found these ships with, you know, much like the Great Lakes in North America, wooden sailing vessels with all of the rigging still up, the ropes still hanging from the spars, and the figureheads hand carved on the brow of the boat. And you know, the stuff is just amazing. And so when you go from things like the Lundgrens finding the Mars to the Grubsjunden being found with the figurehead being a huge carved dragon with a human head in its mouth, which is now already conserved in a museum, and then the Second World War and previous wrecks that have been found and located by the other teams, and the condition they're in, it's a wrecker's paradise, really.
You've done work in Scapa Flow, talking about the Second World War sort of wrecks. You've done work in Scapa Flow as well, haven't you?
I've been teaching tech courses in Scapa Flow, and I've been there personally for visits many times. Dived the classic 7, the remaining 7 wrecks from everything that was scuttled and then lifted. But for me, what I like about Scapa Flow is actually diving the curious site. So I went up last year. A friend of mine, Sally Cartwright, who was 50 last year, she decided to do something slightly different, to do a 50th birthday trip for everyone she knew in the industry that was 50, but of course on the 100th anniversary year of Scapa. So it was the 50s at 100. And we went, and our group on our boat, which was John Thornton's boat, said, well, instead of diving the same old stuff, let's go dive the unusual stuff. So we dived a single engine fighter aircraft. We dived a site where there was a wreck, and you're diving the shadow of the wreck with all the things that fell off when she was salvaged. And we dived the gun turrets of a wreck that was lifted, and the guns fell out as she was lifted. So you've just got 4 gun turrets in a row, and you get to look inside the barbette, see the ball bearings this big that would allow the gun to turn. So we did a curio trip, and it was absolutely fascinating. And personally, I just love the Orkneys. There's so much history there, from, you know, Stone Age and before history, places like, you know, Skara Brae and what have you, and then the war history from the Italian Chapel and the Churchill Barriers, and obviously the scuttling of the fleet, and then John Ray, the famous Arctic explorer who found the remains of the Franklin expedition. He lived there, and his house is there.
Really?
And his grave is in the Kirkwall Cathedral graveyard. So it's just an incredibly fascinating set of islands of history. Amazing place. I love it up there.
That's excellent. I don't know how we're going for time. No one's sort of said anything.
So what are we on? I think we're on about an hour now.
Oh,
10, 11, yeah. Yeah.
Oh, well, we'll just carry on chatting then.
Yeah.
Oh, hang on.
Yeah. Oh, there you go. 10 minutes more.
Please, right. So
the interesting thing, as soon as you talked about Scapa, the interesting thing for me was I'd been to Scapa and I dived battleships like the Margraf, for example. But obviously, a lot of battleships, when they sink, because the guns are so heavy, they flip over and sink. But I believe, I'm not an expert on this, but if they then sink in really deep water, they flip over a few times. So they quite often end up the right way up if they're in really deep water, things like the Bismarck that was found by Ballard as well. Yeah. So for me, it was a real privilege to dive Scapa and see things like the Margraf. And then later to get the opportunity, which we talked about previously, to go to Jutland and see a similar, not exactly the same, a similar class of battleship, more correct way up, and really be able to see it as it would have been, as opposed to upside down.
Yes.
So good comparison.
Yeah.
Like the US National Park Service, Woods Hole, and archaeological projects from the relatively modern, like World War II aircraft, back to the incredibly ancient, like the Antikythera wreck, but they're wrecks. So it's panned out that my job has taken me around the world to lots of incredible wrecks, and my hobby and passion has taken me around the world to lots of dry and wet caves. But I'd like to add to that, it's not just a job. I find maritime archaeology and the history of wrecks, the story of why the wreck's there, who was on board it, how they were lost, fascinating. And I've got a huge library here at my house of my own books that include wrecks as well as caves. So although I'm nearly always only on wrecks when I'm working, it's not just a let's get this done commercial diver mentality. I love it. I'm fascinated by it. So I'll go on a job filming Jutland with a pile of Jutland books. I'll go to Scapa with a pile of Scapa books and try and learn what I'm seeing while I'm there. And that, taking that into consideration, I went off and did my training with the Nautical Archaeological Society, the NAS. Firstly, because I was passionately interested, and secondly, because I thought, well, if I'm being paid to supervise and manage scientific dive teams on archaeological projects, I'll be able to do my job so much better if I know a little bit about archaeological techniques, so I understand what they're trying to achieve, and I can then construct my training, my plans, and my briefings to maximize what they need to do on a dive. So I went off and did my NAS training and found I enjoy that very much as well. I've been very fortunate to be invited to speak at the NAS conference since becoming a member. So yeah, the two kind of, they segue really well, the caves and wrecks, because they're so different.
Maritime archaeology. Science.
Computers, photogrammetry. On Gripschunder now, we've got an iPad in a housing underwater, and when a scientist finds a new artifact, you can mark it on the map because the iPad knows where you are on the wreck, linked to transponders that are linked to GIS on the surface. So you can mark it, describe it, photograph it, before you move on down in the excavation live. So things have changed, but you know, the methodology is still the same. So yeah, it's and for me, surveying or mapping a cave is very similar techniques to surveying or mapping an archaeological site, but the mapping has always been something I'm interested in.
I see there was some, I think it's Nora, who asks, are there any caves and wrecks that you've not explored but would love to in Asia?
I have not had the opportunity to cave dive or cave in Asia as yet. I've dived out there. I've been diving 3 times on the Philippines, teaching courses, and got to dive some of the amazing wrecks in Subic Bay, like the New York, which was incredible. But cave-wise, the cave opportunities in Asia are immense. I would love the opportunity to go and visit some of the massive caves in China. The caves there are just of ludicrous size. You can put like cathedrals inside them and with room around the edges. I know teams who have. A couple of my friends in GUE teams have been out on project baseline projects there. Some of my CDG friends some years back, like Gavin Newman, did big projects out there. I've not had the chance. I'd love to. I suppose the one place, if I could go anywhere I've not been to cave and hopefully cave dive, would be Papua New Guinea, because the books I've read and the footage I've seen of the cave systems up in the jungles there are mind-blowing. So I'd love to go there.
Yeah. And I think, Nora, also, any professional or life tips to aspiring cave divers?
Yeah, absolutely. And the first thing I'd like to say is I'm not going to take credit for this tip, because it was a tip that was given to me 30 years ago when I first started, did my PADI open water course. The guy who trained me was, as we've said, a guy called Steve Axtell. And he was just so inspirational. And this was the old school years of dive training. There was no e-learning, there was no DVD, there was no home study. You went and you had 5 separate 2-hour lectures in a classroom from an instructor. And then you had 5 separate 90-minute pool sessions with development. And then you went off for dives, and you went on a boat, you went to the depth you're supposed to go, etc. And he said at the end of the course, you know, you obviously love this and you've done really well. We're really cool to see you back for some more diving. And I said, oh, I'll be back, don't worry. And he said, the best bit of advice I can give you, and I give this to all my students and have done for the last 30 years, is never waste a dive. So even if it's the best shipwreck you're ever going to see, or the most amazing marine life you're ever going to see, make the effort to take 5 minutes of your dive time on every time you do, every single dive you do, and that could be during the deco maybe, to do one skill. And always do the skills that you know you're not so good at and you know you don't like doing. Because if you do that, after 10 dives, 50 dives, 100 dives, that skill you weren't good at and you didn't like will now become easy and not even a second thought. So then you start another one. And if you make the effort to practice a skill on every single dive you ever do, you'll become a better diver, dive by dive. And the other thing he added to that, and this is really, I'm not going to get political, but a statement of something I'm passionate about, of educating. And I do believe there's a difference in an educator and an instructor. A good instructor becomes an educator. Is that there's too much emphasis in the modern world on fast track. And I think that one of the most important things a new diver can do, whatever level they get to, is make sure between all those courses, they just actually go out and dive with their peers, with people of the same qualification. So they don't think, oh, this guy's an instructor, he'll look after me. Go diving, you know, do a course, then go out and do a year's worth of diving, because you learn from that as well and practice a skill on every dive. And that's probably the best advice I was ever given, and I can simply just pass it on as the best advice I can give.
Have you written or considered writing any sort of books?
Well, it's funny, over the last couple of years, I've been, like, by people like you and Simon, I've been forced into it. So it's like, write a chapter for our book. Okay. And then it was write a chapter for this book. Okay, will you write? Steve Lewis said, will you write the foreword for my book because you were there? Yeah, okay, so I did that. So I've kind of slowly got a little bit more comfortable in the field of writing down my thoughts. So I've got 28 volumes of logbooks sat over there on the shelf. I've logged every dive since my very first one, missed none. But my logbooks aren't off-the-shelf logbooks. They're blank lined notebooks, and I write them as a journal. So an important dive might have 3 or 4 pages of notes and hand-drawn maps and hand-drawn sketches, and I stick in maps of the cave, map of the mine, a picture of the wreck, a picture of the ship as it was. So there's a huge resource for me to go back on, and I have probably, I suppose, 5 or 6 chapters of what I'd like to eventually become the story of my very lucky journey. So it is the plan. I hope Simon's listening, because he is such an incredibly talented author and writer that unless he hides under his duvet, I will be approaching him when I get closer.
Hey, he's got nothing better to do this evening. They're in quarantine. He's been there for 2 days, like you. He's in quarantine for 2 weeks. So
it's I guess it's the weird thing. It's like a bit like my diving and a bit like my teaching. It's one of those things. If I do it, I want to do it as well as I can. And authorship, writing is not a natural gift I have. So it'll be a hard journey. But if it's not up to, if I look at it and go, I'm not happy with that, I won't ever take it any further. But I'd love to get to the point where I could do it.
It's like as you were just mentioning, practice a skill that you're not good at every time, until ultimately it becomes far easier to do. It becomes an automatic process. And writing's pretty much the same. The more that you do it, the easier it becomes, and the better you get at it, hopefully.
Yeah.
But it would be, just looking at, and we've only touched on just a very, very few of the things that you've done, but it would be, a most interesting and very exciting sort of story. So cool. That would be good.
Yeah, I'd like to do it. I'd like to do it.
And Nora's just said, hate to say this, but 4 minutes more. Oh. So what did you do on your birthday, Phil?
Well, I've been away for the last 2 months on another major project. I did explain to you earlier when we were offline that at this time it was, we can't really talk about the results very much, but I can say what it was. We were doing another contract for the DPAA, also in Croatia, on a different Second World War aircraft. So it was a very productive but very tough 2 months of work. I was out there for 2 weeks before the rest of the team to receive the shipment and set up all the gear, build the dredge, lay out the boat, everything. Then 4 weeks of project diving. And then I was out there an additional week to clear all the gear up and get it shipped back out of country. So pretty busy, pretty physical for 2 months. And then basically also the job was much deeper than previous jobs we've done. So it was mentally very draining. Being a dive safety officer and dive operations manager, I'm in charge of everybody there. So after the last dive, when everyone was safe, 0 incidents, no injuries, nothing, it was a very big relief. So when I got home knowing I was going into quarantine, I was like, well, I don't need to do anything adventurous for the next 14 days. I'm quite happy to sit at my house, read books, watch some movies and bits and pieces like that. So on my actual birthday, I had picked up 2 personal treats from duty free on the way out of Croatia. So I sat in my garden in a big woolly jumper and a woolly hat because it's cold, but it was sunny. And I had a generous portion of 16-year-old Lagavulin single malt and a Cuban cigar. And I just sat there watching the blue sky, having a nice gentle puff on my full-size lardy and sipping on my 16-year-old single malt, thinking, you know what, there's a lot of bad things going on in the world, but life is good. It's a journey. It's what you make it. But I'm in a pretty good place, sat here with my cigar and my whiskey, and resting. So it was a very quiet birthday, but reflecting on what we'd achieved in the last 2 months, it was a very nice birthday. So thank you.
That would be excellent, Phil. Hopefully we get the chance to sort of share a glass or two of the whiskey in the not too distant future when travel is underway.
Yeah.
And hopefully you can make it back down to Australia and see a little more of it next time.
Yeah, well, that's another story, as we know. But yeah, I have been to Australia once, but I spent 4 weeks in a warehouse working on a movie for Warner Brothers Studios, a movie of questionable quality called Sanctum. But it was another story to my diving career. There'll definitely be a sub chapter of that in the book when I get around to writing it. But I'd love to come back because you've got some incredible caves and some incredible cave divers. I'd love to visit and hang out
I think they would love to sort of see you as well.
That'd be great. It'd be really good. It's a lot of people I've met around the world at other places, but I've not yet been. So it's on the list, definitely.
Excellent. Phil, it's been absolutely superb. So thank you very much indeed. Now, Nora?
Yes, I'm here. Yes, so we're at the end of the session itself, which I hate to say because I'm totally enjoying this discussion, definitely. And I could hear a whole lot more stories from Phil and his fantastic expeditions, especially his story on J2 Camp 4. I would like to know more because you're one of the few that actually entered that area. So maybe in the future, definitely when we are able to see each other in person, and hopefully in the next ADEX that is coming next year, possibly. So once again, I would like to say happy belated birthday to you, Phil. 52 is a young age. So stay young always. And thank you, David, for arranging this for us. And on behalf of ADEX community, thank you for sharing all the stories. And although we are stuck at home, it is definitely something that we can live by and enjoy by. So David, do you have anything to say? Phil, do you have anything